My dudes, as you know, with my art study series of videos here on my YouTube channel, I like to dig into artists whose unique and distinctive voice, their unique and distinctive style have left an impact that leaves others in their field emulating everything that they're doing. And that's exactly what we're going to be trying to do, is try to understand what worked really well about that particular artist's approach, their technique, their tools. What are they doing that's making their work really stand out? One of the most impactful indie games of the last 10 years has been Hollow Knight and Silksong. Recently, Silksong was released. I'm not going to be talking about game design. I'm not going to be talking too much about the under the hood stuff of how they use normal maps for their lighting or any of that stuff. Too technical. It's mostly just about the illustrative quality of it, why certain scenes work really well together, the colors that they choose, the kind of mix of detail mixed with the blending of depth sorting. And Silksong is really kind of like a masterclass in how to get good readability on your characters in a hand-drawn environment. And you might be going, well, Trent, what do you know about this stuff? Well, I was the director of a Metroidvania, 2D Metroidvania game called Twilight Monk that just came out. We spent about 2.5 years working on it. And if you find Silksong to be way too difficult, you should definitely check out Twilight Monk. And we certainly looked at what they were doing with Silksong, but we also wanted to make a little bit of a unique and distinctive art style away from that. You know, we weren't just trying to do what they did. But there are a lot of other games like Crowsworn and many others that are kind of doing a lot more of exactly what Hollow Knight does. And so that's what we're going to be really trying to dissect. I'm not going to get too technical. You don't have to be an Unreal Engine artist or Unity Engine artist to understand this stuff. It's mostly about the illustrative quality and how you can apply a little bit of that to your work. Especially this will be useful if you're into line art or if you're into comic book style art. This is going to be really helpful for you to get a good read on your compositions, and maybe you pick up a few things if you're a game artist working on a 2D game as well. All right, so let's dig into the art of Silksong. Okay, so first of all, I am playing this game over on my gaming channel. If you want to hear my insights into game design as I play through it and you want to watch a grown man cry, you can watch me play that over on my my gaming YouTube channel. The first thing that you'll notice visually here is that it's a very monochromatic scene. The two colors that make up this background are almost fairly monochromatic. But then, my dudes, then you have this bright saturated red. This is brilliant because if you look at the color wheel, it's the exact complementary to our two green and bluish hued background colors that we're using for that monochromatic background. The second thing that you're going to notice is that there's so much contrast going on here. There's value contrast. The foreground is extremely dark. You have almost pitch black in the foreground of these mushrooms in the foreground here. And then in the background, you have this much lighter value contrast. So the darkest point in the very distance is this color right here. And it's not very dark at all. It never goes to black all the way in the background. That creates this real sense of depth here. And then simultaneously, you also have the edge contrast, the blurriness of this background. You could have crazy amounts of detail back there, but because it's all blurry, our eye stays in focus on the foreground. So we see all these ornate details in the cage here and all that, because the foreground and the gameplay space is in focus. That's got the crisp edged details. Same thing that we see with camera photography as well. You can achieve this by literally using a blur filter in Photoshop on just the background, or if you're in a game engine, just do a layer that has a blur material on it or a blur post-processing effect. Notice that the amount of detail on Hornet is very low. In fact, if you look at almost all of the characters in the game, none of them really have detail within the character in themselves. And part of the reason for that is because they have to animate thousands, if not tens of thousands of frames of animation. And in fact, with Silksong specifically, they go above and beyond what any other 2D game does with the amount of animations and the animation blending. So even if you're running, for example, and you jump, you'll get a different animation than if you're standing still and jumping straight up, for example. There's so many more extra animations that we don't really realize are happening all at once here. And so you need the artwork for the characters to be simple if you're going to animate hundreds or thousands of frames for them. And this does not use a puppet animation. There is a kind of an art style. If you notice something like, there is a game called Dragon's Crown by Vanillaware They do a lot of these puppet animation kind of art styles that allow them to do highly detailed animation, but you can't rotate forms or get a fluidity to the movement that you can with hand-drawn animations. Part of what makes Silksong distinctly unique. An added benefit to that is that you can have all this crazy detail going on in the backgrounds, like highly rendered and highly detailed backgrounds, but your characters are very simple and plain, so they stand out. That's what you call detail contrast. So they're playing with multiple different things here. They got color contrast, they have edge contrast with the focal length, right? See how all that's blurry? We can really see it when I freeze frame it. And then also the value contrast of like pitch black on foreground elements, and it's almost like it's another layer. It really feels like foreground when you see it in motion. And then you also have this light vignetting so that the character is always illuminated and the darkness around the outside is always following you. They tune that up and down so that sometimes you're literally like pushing through these almost pitch black environments where only the character and a couple of feet in front of them is illuminated, and an enemy might be in the blackness of the shadow of this vignetting, and it leaps out at you, which also creates a sense of dread and a sense, it's really a horror technique. And so you might be going, all right, well, that's all nice for a video game, but what about like, how can I apply that to my own paintings? Well, are you blurring your backgrounds? Are you keeping your backgrounds mostly monochromatic, and then your character, are you using contrasting colors like what we just talked about? Like, are you using detail contrast? This is a game made by artists. Like there's definitely, incredible game design and incredible programming going on, and there's a lot there, but it's a game made by artists, and that's part of why it feels so atmospheric. And I won't even go into like the music and all that, because it's not as applicable to your artwork, but it is musical, even visually, in a way. It's an incredible composition utilizing all of these incredible fundamentals. And we always talk about, you go to any artist channel and they'll say, yeah, study the fundamentals. That's because they apply throughout everything visual, even in photography as well. Now, when you're watching footage of Silksong, you might think this is a 2D game. It's all hand-drawn, right? Well, in reality, it is and it isn't. It's actually 2D planes in a 3D space. And I can open up the Twilight Monk file and show you what I mean. Because we built our environments and our maps in the same way that they do it in Silksong, which is to have these 2D planes that you can see here and it's in 3D space. So you're getting this parallaxing, literally the ground that's moving faster as you're moving across the screen in Silksong is forward closer to the camera in 3D space within the engine. And if you're a digital artist, you'll recognize that this is not dissimilar from working with layers or a layer stack in Photoshop or Sketchbook Pro or Clip Studio Paint. So what you're seeing on screen right now is this area called Graymore, and you can see that everything in the distance is kind of almost flattened out. And then you have these planes, if you can imagine it in that 3D space I just showed you, you have these planes of fog that are moving, and they're created by using what's called a particle emitter. And those particle emitters create these fog effects that kind of keep spawning and repeating, and that creates this layered depth. But you notice it gets a lot wider along the floor, and a lot of that is happening because of the light that we talked about, that vignetting light that we talked about earlier in this video. And so I found this image. This is a early prototype image from Silksong as they were still in development. They had just done some early showcasing of it, and I've kind of cut out Hornet here, and you could boost up the saturation if you want to. Let's break it down. Like if you want to get these effects, you see how I've got my layer stack here. That's just my farthest background, and I'm going to create a new layer and then like put that right in between the character and the background for BG for background. And then I'm just going to hit it with like a little bit of like a whiter, kind of like a fog mist behind the character. Too much saturation and it's going to pull too much attention. So you want to make sure it's very desaturated. This background has to be very desaturated and even a little bit bright. You see how that immediately creates a little bit more vignetting, right? We can even darken if we wanted to. We could darken the outside area here to pull more attention towards it. I'm fighting that UI a little bit. But then also in this mid ground, what you're getting is this kind of silhouetting of these structures back here. If you want to get those to pop out a little bit more, you can make a selection, and I'm going to just kind of sloppily put in a little selection here in a time lapse. And so you could, if you're trying to do the kind of painted effect, you could make a selection and then hit it with a highlight, and boom, there you go. You've got a little bit of silhouetting. Maybe that's like too much, so you got to erase some of it out. And again, with background stuff, you want to make sure that it's not in focus. So you go to blur, Gaussian blur, if you're in Photoshop, and there you go. Now it suddenly starts to feel a little bit more like it's in the background. If you wanted your characters here to pop out a little bit more, you could add a little bit of saturation to their color. So they're just still on the background layer. So I'm just going to go to Image, Adjustments, Replace Color, and then saturate that out a little bit and then brighten it. And then suddenly those pop out a lot more because the background is almost entirely gray. Now, if you had something back here, let's say that you've got some, I don't know, like some creature over here, I'm not going to actually draw anything in here, but like, let's say you had some crabby thing and you want him to really stand out, like pick like a bright yellow, saturated yellow, and boom, like he's going to stand out like crazy if he's silhouetted, and even more so if you add like a glow to this guy, Like almost the problem with something like that though, is that now anybody who's playing it is going to be looking at these illuminated creatures. And so like, that's one of the reasons why they don't do a lot with illuminated creatures or monsters in Hollow Knight as well, because it would pull too much attention away from where they want you to look. And a lot of times this big fading glow behind the character is moving with the player. So it's kind of always keeping them in the focal point with the highest level of contrast, of value contrast, and the highest level of color contrast. You'll also notice in every screenshot that you look up, Hornet is not affected by the lighting. You don't see things like, bright yellow highlights on the character or anything. They're generally not really affected by the lighting in the environment because specifically it's just the main character. You do see it on enemies though, but that's also because it was very important in development, I'm sure, where they were just like, no, you need to know where the character's at all times. It also seems to me that they added just loads of particles and glowies in the final version. And obviously, like, there's a lot of ways to get a lot of glowies in your environment and in your scene. One way is to create a new layer and then just go in with like an airbrush and create a lot of little drops and make sure that they're using the airbrush tool so that they're not like a hard edge so that it feels like it's fading. And then just copy and paste that around using the Command and Shift keys, hold that down, and then you can hit Command T to rotate. And then that kind of creates a little bit of a duplicate that it has a little bit more variety to it. But then they've got just tons of these particles in the backgrounds. So you could also use the stamper tool. And every digital art program kind of has something similar. You'll also notice that these lanterns back here, they're not really highly crisp or detailed. So those tend to be something that's kind of backed off. So you could just like hint at that with the airbrush tool back here by color dabbing, getting that warm. But notice they're not really warm. If those lights were super warm, that would again pull attention away from the main character. See, well, let's try that. See, now suddenly it becomes a little less clear what our focal point is. And this is one of the things that the game does very well, is it kind of keeps the attention always where they want you to be looking, which is at where the character is at and the enemies are at. That's what is important. And everything else kind of has to take a little bit of a back seat to that. It's all about gameplay. Everything has to serve gameplay. I'm going to show you a little bit more of what I mean by like kind of popping out your play space and your floor by kind of creating a little bit of a fog along the floor. Now, ideally, if you're doing a painting like this, you've already only painted your foreground, though, solid black foreground on a separate layer. But because I just pulled this from Reddit or something, it's all merged. Deselect the ground because I'm just going to be painting in a little bit of like this fog. And I'm going to do that as like another mid layer. You see how I'm going to hide my selection here so you can see. You can see how that's kind of making things pop out. You can immediately begin to see this is how you get that layered effect that Hollow Knight and Silksong get really well. And of course, some of that fog can go into the foreground, if you've got like some plants or something like that. you know, you could do something like this. I should do that on another layer. Here we go. Just lighten that up just a little bit along the bottom. And boom, you've already got, you know, some pretty nice distinctive separation of foreground and background and play space. And by the way, if you wanted your characters to pop out, you go ahead and erase out that fog that you just put in around the outside edge so that those have that strong black, solid black and value contrast that I was talking about earlier in the video. And yes, this all applies to your paintings. This isn't just for game art, man. Like I hope that you can see where I'm coming from when I say that. I think it would be easy to just disregard this and go, oh, well, it reads clearly in the game because it's got all these different movements going on and all this stuff like flying around and moving, you know. And that is true. They use movement also to control your eye and where they want you to look, right? But at the same time, they're using pretty standard values or pretty standard contrast techniques and tricks to make sure that there's good readability on things. And so obviously this is a huge game. There's lots of zones and lots of really interesting and crazy, really cool art tricks that they did. Of course, I want to point out, you know, that Silksong is an exceptional game because of its game design. The art is a plus, the art is a bonus, and it's clear that the artists put a lot of care and detail into a lot of hidden things you might not even really notice right away, movements that other games just wouldn't have the time or budget to do. And so it's an exceptional game and it deserves a lot of the credit that it gets. I would love to do a deeper dive and break down a little bit more of the design philosophy of the characters as well, and dig into what makes a compelling character or, you know, creating a monster. But I've done a ton of workshops already and tutorials over on my Gumroad channel already about my philosophy and approach to character design. I've been working in video games for 25 years now, and so I know a thing or two about it, at least historically, and I kind of retired from doing that, but I enjoy teaching the next generation how to do such things. So if you're interested in more of a hardcore deep dive into character design and environment concept art for video games, check out some of my workshops over on my Gumroad channel. If you're new to digital art, check out my easy art lessons. They're super beginner and they will teach you everything you need to know to draw. I talked about fundamentals a lot in this video, right? Well, if you want to deep dive into more of those fundamentals and give you actual day-to-day things to work on with guided lessons, that's my easy art lessons. You can check that out over on my Gumroad channel as well. Thank you so much for tuning in. And of course, if you have suggestions for other art styles that you'd like for me to study and do breakdowns of, please do drop that in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe. And I'll see you guys in the next video. All right, ciao.